tonight to cover, as you see over here, the founding of the state. Basically, the first round, May to September of 48. Rabbi Oberstein always has fun by putting up my signs for the courses. This year we're covering the year 1642, 1643, But here it's so much packed with action that I originally planned, as I started to work on this week, to cover May, June, July, and August. I got to around the first week of June. Because you understand, or you will in a minute, this is a action-packed, in every sense of the word, era in Jewish age, among the most dramatic weeks of our entire 3,000-year history. Therefore, it's particularly appropriate. S.D. Samuel's father served in the Tzahal, when it was, I don't think it was even called Tzahal at that time. Just when the Haganah and everything was being put together, he was from the yeshiva. He came to Palestine, and he said, "This is something that needs to be done." This is the story of people like that. So, without any further ado, let's get down to business. We have a lot to cover, as I always say, and this time I really mean it. Tonight, as you see over here, it's the Arab invasion. What do I mean by the Arab invasion? Let's go to the first one, Jake. Here we go. Yeah, I can sort of see it. But as you can see, this is a good map which shows you they're going to be invaded in many different directions. But what exactly do I mean by that? That I'll explain very shortly. But before I do that, I want to make up for something that we didn't get 100% right last time. And I do want you to see this. And that is the Truman clip. Because I told you, and nothing is equal to seeing it, that they have in that movie, it's a dramatization, of course, of the financial difficulties President Truman will have running the famous campaign that takes place at this time in the middle and late part of 1948, and which is not going to be an inconsiderable, will not be an inconsiderable part of the reason he's so concerned to get the Jewish vote, to put it in simple terms. So without any further ado, I think it'll be self-explanatory. Let's go right for it. It's a dramatization, remember. It's on the train.
The leaders of the Democratic Party have read the polls, and they have told me that they do not want to throw good money away on a hopeless quest. So they have stopped paying for the train. Now, I don't care whether you vote for Harry Truman or not. That's not the issue here. What is important is that the president can take his case to the people and let the people make a choice. So with your help, I'm going to pass the hat, and let's see if we can keep this train running. All right? I told my fellow party members that if Moses had waited on the polls, he'd still be waiting in Egypt. Give him hell, Larry. Well, I'm doing it. Well, thank you.
Isn't that something? Now, people don't know. And I told you how eventually they got them. I didn't do it by passing a hat. But we'll save that for the future. Keep all this in mind as we now switch our scene and direct our attention to the Holy Land, to the Middle East, and more specifically to what I was talking about last time. 2 weeks ago seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? You get hooked on it. If you recall, the United Nations resolution that they're going to have partition in 2 states was at the very end of November of 47. And in December, January, and February, and March, the Arabs were on their offensive, and the Jews, for a variety of reasons I tried to explain, were playing defense and not doing that great a job of it. But beginning in April, it changed around, and in April and May, for 6 weeks, the Jews went on a major offensive, given the small resources that they had, and they conquered a lot of Arab territory. Now, I want to remind you, almost all of that territory was in the Jewish area. I'll give you an example, Yaffo, and places like this. This was in the area assigned by the partition to the Jewish state. But if you recall, the original Jewish state, as designed by the United Nations, had 650,000 Jews, 400,000 Arabs. And the partition resolution, which was unrealistic, but thank God they got something out of it, was sort of predicated on the idea that somehow or other the Jews and the Arabs will work it out. And we know that this was never destined to be. Here we are 60-some years later, and it hasn't happened. So if you're an Arab in Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and places like that, when news of the Jewish victories of April hit the Arab street, they react with frenzy, as you can imagine, and they settle the question for the governments of whether or not they're going to invade, because, as we'll see in a minute, Baruch Hashem, the Arab states were completely unprepared for war. They didn't have the military for it, they didn't have the resources, the weapons, and the supplies. And that really means that history has a lot to do with psychology, that mentally speaking, psychologically speaking, the leaders of Egypt and all these other countries, Syria and Iraq and whatever, never thought it'd really come down to it. But when you start to hear about Dir Yassin, when you start to hear about the Haganahs taking Yaffo and Tzfat and this and that and the other, they go crazy. And we all know, even today, you talk about the Arab Spring, that's a nice meaty word that they came up with to put a spin on it, which could also be the current frenzy, which is in the Arab world. And it ain't over yet, as we know. And so you can just imagine what it was like in April, May, first part of May in 48. And they see themselves, not unreasonably, as riding to the rescue of the Palestinians. Everybody says the Arabs in Palestine are a bunch of boobs. They don't know what they're doing. True. The Mufti and all these guys are a bunch of losers. True. We don't want to lose Palestine. We don't want the Haganah and the Palmach and God forbid the Etzel to come in and just kick everybody out. And so we got to rescue them. Plus, at the same time, it's mixed together with the idea of, let's take out the Jews. What I'm trying to explain to you is there wasn't a clear plan, just a mood in the Arab world, and that's how it went. The British did not expect that the Arabs, unprepared as they were, would actually go into battle. And as you see, the Jewish areas are thus. This is quite an area to invade and try to take over. What the Arabs really are thinking of, at least particularly Jordan, is let's at least take over the Arab part, because it's a lot. And are you going to go and fight the Israelis, the Jewish part? Not clear. They may be pushed by public opinion to do so, but I can tell you that Abdullah, the king of Jordan, wasn't crazy about it, although he will waver back and forth, And this is not altruism. If they could, they would. But mentally speaking, the decision makers haven't really said, oh, we're going to go in and we're going to take Tel Aviv, we're going to crush everybody, all the rest of it. And so there's a tremendous gap between what we call rhetoric on the one hand and what you're practically able to do on the other hand. Thank God. Because otherwise it would have been no joke. So the war that will break out on May 15th, the day after Israel's proclaimed a state, Saturday, Shabbos, May 15th, 1948, will be a war between two sides, neither of whom has gotten its act together. The Jews aren't fully prepared by any means because of the British embargo, because the Jews had their own psychological issues to deal with, as I'll talk about in a second. The Arabs the same. And so it's not what you usually think. It's two groups sort of stumbling into it and against each other. And the 48 war, particularly in the first stages, has that kind of profile of two drunks, just banging into each other and whacking at each other. It's weird. Meanwhile, among the Jews, there's hesitancy and confusion, ironically, in April and May, even May of 1948. Even though today, independence and statehood is taken for granted, but obviously, at that time it wasn't. The Jews never had a state in thousands of years. This is really a new idea. Many of the Jews, understandably, are terrified of being exposed to an Arab invasion. They didn't see it the way I just described it. I'm talking with 20/20 hindsight, with now we have all the records and we know how many soldiers the Arabs put into the field and all the rest of it. At that time, they thought, is 1 million Arabs going to come? And the British are going to give them a zillion tanks and airplanes, and they're going to kill them, it's going to be a Holocaust. So you understand, a lot of people were scared out of their minds. And it's perfectly understandable that be the case. You hear the blood-curdling rhetoric of the Arabs. Let's go to the next one. Here's the famous statement of Azam Pasha, who was the head of the Arab League. And he's a civilized guy. But look what he says over there. He says there'll be extermination, it'll be like worse than the Crusades and the Mongols. If you're living in Tel Aviv, if you're living in Haifa, or one of these places, what do you expect? The Arabs are coming in, like I say, with some gigantic Islamic jihad, and they're going to sweep everybody into the sea. So you can understand, a lot of people will say, whoa, let's rethink this. Maybe we shouldn't go. Maybe the British shouldn't be kicked out. In other words, last-minute shakes, as they can say. The big exception to this is Ben Gurion. At this time, he was the one who was really stark. I just happen to have a very fascinating book, a golden oldie, published in 1949, called New Star in the Middle East by Kenneth Bilby. He was from the famous reporter Once Upon a Time in the New York Herald Tribune. And it's very well written. And he's writing it in 1949, right in the wake of all this. So he's going back and forth between the two sides as an American journalist. And right there in all the blood-curdling rhetoric, some of us are old enough to remember just before the Six-Day War? The Arab, and the truth of the matter is, if you go on YouTube, you probably see it today. They're scary. And he says over here that, you see all the, carryings on in the Arab world, and then he flies to Tel Aviv and meets Ben Gurion, and he says, Azam tells me, this is him talking to Ben Gurion, that the Arabs are going to wear you down and wipe you out. And Ben Gurion says, all right, we'll see. They can say that. I have only one thing to say to them. We are not asking for any mercy. Give us your best shot, if that's what you want to do. That's pretty tough talk. And Ben Gurion was a realist, so he wasn't just shooting his mouth off. And so I guess he figured like this, at this time, this one needs to be said. Now, interestingly, Chaim Weizmann, who usually is thought of as a moderate, and he was, at this particular point, he said, I guess, I've been working for all my life for this second. Don't blow it. If there's a possibility of a state now, do it, and the heck with the consequences. Go for it. He's also pushing that the different Zionist parties who are making up it's not a Knesset yet, but it'll be like a Knesset, they call it Nefcher Am, should vote clearly for statehood, which was not clear. So it's kind of mind-boggling that as late as May of 48, a lot of Zionist parties, I repeat, were opposed to a unilateral declaration of independence. The Zionist parties, from then till today, is strange bedfellows and musical chairs. Isn't that true? The parties are constantly switching around in Israel. You need a chronological scorecard to keep track of who is who and which party is which, and these two groups formed in that one. The main party itself, Mapai, was started in 1930 as a combination of two earlier parties, Achdut Avodah and Poalei Zion. And then you got to go and look who they were back in the old country in Russia and how they mixed back and forth. Meaning even the Mapai party, the central party of Ben Gurion, which will be the party of power for 30 years, from 48 till 78 or 77, is a coalition. It's got different groups. May I say, we live in a time of Jewish fractionation. That's an understatement. One of the great achievements of Zionism, can't take away from them, is that in spite of all the fractionation, they worked some way to come together, at least for some goals. And that's how they created a state and did all the other sorts of things. Many in the Mapai, Ben Gurion's party, are moderates, even chicken. I don't blame them. Here's two leading figures who are against the establishment of a state. Eliezer Kaplan is the finance minister. He was the financial wizard at that time. Zalman will be for many, many years. They hold high positions in the government and all the rest of it. And they say, don't, you keep the British here, don't do it. Even on May 1st, I mean, it's like crazy. Ben Gurion has to wage a major battle in his own party. And Moshe Sharet, his number 2, is wavering all the way through to outvote the chickens who are influenced by the other parties. It's very fascinating. Sharet will go see General Marshall, as I think I mentioned last time, and General Marshall will say to him, a week before Israel is founded as a state, 10 days or whatever before Israel is founded as a state, and General Marshall will say to him, I've been a general, as you know, and I'm telling you from a military point of view, you're going to lose, so don't do this. And Moshe Sharet's going to walk out of there, and he's the Zionist of Zionists, and he's going to say, whoa, maybe we shouldn't do this. And so you have that kind of a pressure, which we don't appreciate unless you go back to that particular period in time, and many in the party are affected by the attitudes of the Mapam party, which is one party over to the left. How do you go explain this? The Mapam party is a combination of Hashomer Tzair and a 1944 breakoff from the Mapai called Achdut Avodah, but it's different than the Achdut Avodah that I spoke about before. Right? See, I told you need a scorecard. I could explain it, but I'd lose you. The Mapam party, founded in the middle of World War II, is romantically pro-Soviet, because in the middle of World War II, the Red Army was heroic. We know this. They look upon this as a glorious thing. Stalin is right on everything except Zionism. Nebuch, he hasn't quite worked that out yet. One day he will. They're committed to that view, but in everything else he's right. They're goo-goo idealistic on coexistence with the Arabs. In their minds, the enmity that the Arabs display toward the Jews is due to the effendis, to the rich capitalists who are misguiding the anger of the Arab masses instead of being against the capitalists, they redirect them against the Jews. And so this is crazy. That's not where it comes from at all. But that's the way they look at it. They thoroughly misunderstand, obviously, the Arab hostility. In addition to which, the Mapam party cannot agree, and this is very interesting, on Chalukat ha'aretz. It bothers them as it bothers Begin. It bothers many people, the idea of partition. It's unnatural. They have a love of the land. How can you have a state in which, Hebron is not part of it and, that whole business? And it really, really bothers them. They want a binational state. In May of 1948, they want a binational state. And ironically, these guys, at the same time as they're arguing against establishment, they're the most fierce fighters in the Israeli army. This is the Palmach. These are the guys who fight like lions over and over again, all throughout 1948, from the beginning of 48, even in the tough times. And they're the guys who fight to get the road to Jerusalem open and all these other places like that. They're destroyers of the Arab villages. These are the guys talking about binational state. They're the ones who are doing what we talked about last time, which is the securing of the Jewish base areas around Tel Aviv, around Tveria and all these other places. But they don't see themselves as destroyers of the Arab. They see themselves as doing just, basic, defense stuff in pursuit of a broader goal of getting a binational state. So it's a crazy world that the Jews presented then as they do today. The other big power block in there is the religious, the Mizrahi party, which at that time was divided into two parties. They didn't get along so well. Many don't remember this. It was a Mizrahi and Hapola Mizrahi, right? The Hapola Mizrahi was, these are the famous three people who, these were the iconic figures once upon a time long ago. Rabbi Meir Berlin, Bar Ilan, now they call Bar Ilan University. He's the son of the Netziv. Him and Rabbi Fishman, him and Rabbi Maimon really were the guys who put together the Mizrahi party. They went around the world all the time talking to all the communities and get the conventions together and all this sort of thing. And they made the religious Zionism as a political movement with institutions and votes and all that sort of thing. They had in Palestine, there's, as I say, a split between, you might say, the more left wing of the movement, which is represented by Moshe Chaim Shapiro, and Rav Maimon, who's the Mizrahi part over there. The Hapola Mizrahi, just to give you an idea what I'm talking about, probably most people don't even know it. The Hapola Mizrahi wanted to be just like the socialist groups. So every one of the socialist groups had a youth movement. So, Hanoar HaTzioni and all the other things. The Mapam had their youth movement, and the Mapai certainly had a youth movement. The General Zionism, so Hapola Mizrahi is Bnei Akiva. That's what it is. That's the youth movement of the thing. The Bnei Akiva is fighting in the Palmach. The Mizrahi doesn't have a youth movement because Mizrahi is more like, what shall I say, more bourgeois and more of the traditional types. So the Palm Mizrahi are Mapam wannabes. So therefore, they also are if the Mapam is against splitting the country and going for a binational state, this is mind-boggling. Then the Palm Mizrahi is for a binational state and not splitting the country. They're all out in Google land. It's also true that at that time, unlike today, the Mizrahi party in general were, I might say, dedicated moderates who were always afraid, it's funny in light of current reality, always afraid of appearing as extremists. And because they're very sensitive to the idea that they'll say, you should be very strong in the Arabs. They'll say, well, you're not doing the fighting. You understand? You're not doing it, even though they were, but they're only a small part. And so they always were afraid of being branded as some kind of extremist group within the Zionist movement and being responsible for other people dying, and that made them super moderate. The regular Mizrahi parties led by Rav Maiman, a very, very interesting person who has, let's go, is that the next one? Yeah. As you can see over here, Ben Gurion did not have friends. I don't know if you know the biography of Ben Gurion. He was a funny guy in many ways, weird, a very ruthless fellow. He had no friends. His politics, he stabbed people in the back, people stabbed him in the back. Rav Maiman was his only friend, right? As you can see from the quote over there. They quarreled for 40 years over religious things. In other words, when I say religious things, that they should have another religious kibbutz, that they should have funding for school and for, a shul and this and that and the other. But they agreed on the fundamentals. You understand? I can tell you right now, that first 30 years of Israel go like this. The Mapai party ran the country because they always had the backing of the Mizrahi party. That's what it boils down to. And they did that because on foreign policy and most domestic matters, they agreed. They just didn't agree, as I say before, on the very specific area of religion. And so there will be, it's very interesting, in the first 30 years of Israel, there will be people in the Mizrahi party who say, we're always battling Ben Gurion to get more money for another school here, a tichon there, an opana, KBY, something like that. But only in that area. Everything else, they really agree with him. You follow? So they will be the ones who, Ramaiman will be the one who say, Ben Gurion said we should have a state, then we should have a state. Right? And this is our chance. And let's go for it. You'll see it a little bit later. He's the one sitting next to Ben Gurion when they proclaimed the state on May 14th. So, as I told you before, even stalwarts like Moshe Sharet in the Mapai party, he was number 2 always, were really wavering under pressure. All I can tell you without going into too many details is that Ben Gurion rallies the troops. I'm talking about politically speaking. And he says, we got to go through with it. He butts heads together. And there's a lot of meetings, endless meetings after meeting after meeting. I know we don't have this in Baltimore, but they have it in Israel. And it's also true that the toxic Arab rhetoric renders any notion of a binational state ridiculous. And so, ironically, as is often the case in history, you're going to laugh at what I'm saying, but now that I explained it, you'll understand. Who do you really have to thank for the founding of the State of Israel? This guy. Well, if he would have offered a moderate option, he could split the Zionist movement. Fact or not? So it's what I always talk about as the unintended consequences of actions. You got to play like a chess person if you're doing politics. You do this, what's going to happen this lead to that, and that. If you don't, then it's you have only yourself to blame. And so throughout all this fog, the Arab states come together in May 5th, May 10th, whatever, and they finally agree to attack, but that's all they agree on, thank God. They do not hold of the Mufti of Jerusalem. They consider him a loser. Not because he was hooked up with Hitler or anything like that, but simply because they consider him an unprincipled, kind of opportunist, all of which is, of course, true. And what emerges, therefore, is the Arab states said like this, we're going to rescue the Palestinians, we're going to be the ones in charge, but there are 2 Shiitas, you might say, over there. This guy is officially the commander-in-chief of all the Arab armies from Iraq, and of course you have the king of Jordan over there. General Safwad, he says, if we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's get a coordinated attack on 4 directions, subject to a central command. This is the right way to do it. We'll have the objectives. They even had it all worked out before, that they all merge. The Lebanon army, the Syrian army, the Iraqi army all goes to Afula. Then you cut the north off from the rest of the country, and then you take Haifa, and then you go down to the thing. I mean, it was a real plan. Abdullah basically said, yes, the heck with him, the heck with everybody else. I'm grabbing what I can get. Right? And the reason is because that was his objective. I explained to you before. He still never got over Lawrence of Arabia. This is true. He was with Lawrence of Arabia. Him and his brother Faisal. They were the ones that fought with Lawrence of Arabia. That's who they are. And he got Jordan as a consolation prize because he couldn't hold on to Arabia because the Saudis kicked him out. And so he still wants to see the big state, Jordan and Syria and Palestine, is all under him. And basically he looks. And he, by the way, is a descendant of Mohammed, so he's from an aristocratic Arab prince. So he looks at the leaders of Egypt and these other kinds of bunch of upstarts, and you guys do what you want. I'm getting farzich, I'm going to get what I can. And therefore, he's not going to really coordinate with these guys. And that's going to set the general tone. This is one of the reasons why Israel does not get wiped out, because the Arabs launch, as I say before, uncoordinated and therefore unsuccessful kind of attacks. In general, the Arab disunity and the Arab lack of clarity is the big boon for the Jews. In war, as we know in America, even a powerful country like us with a big defense budget and general staff, if you don't have a goal, if you don't have clarity, it ain't going anywhere. I name Vietnam. I name Iraq. Right? You understand? It's a business model. If you have a business, which I don't have, but you do, if you have a business model, you got to have a plan and a goal. True? If you have no clarity, then you can have all the resources you want. It ain't going anywhere. The fog of war is so powerful in this conflict that emerges, what we call the first Arab-Israeli war. Each side knows nothing about the other side. Therefore, each side vastly overestimates the others. The Arabs say, the Jews have 500,000 men with thousands of tanks. Ben Gurion, I remember, says, oh boy, the Arab Legion is, I remember he says 40,000 strong, and they have 500 British tanks. The Arab Legion was 6,000 strong, and they had no tanks. You understand? The Israelis did not have 500,000 men. They wish they had 500,000 men. The intelligence on both sides stinks. It's two drunks banging into each other. It's really interesting. The Yishuv, the Jewish community, is organized. And it's in the process of increasing the organization, as we're talking over here. And they slowly crank up the draft. The Arabs will get volunteers from Chutz La'aretz. You understand? No, the Egyptian army doesn't expand tremendously. They'll get people from Yugoslavia and from Morocco and from, I don't know where, Pakistan and things like this, Saudi Arabia, will come want to join the fight. That's how they get their ranks. So what I'm trying to show you is one of the most important differences in the 48 war between Israel on the one hand and all the Arab states on the other hand is that the Israelis, from day one, because of their tradition of being a state within a state, had the infrastructure and the apparatus and the bureaucracy to actually turn, once they get their independence, to start working immediately on maximizing their potential. If they have this population, they're going to turn it into an army, into a defense, capability, into infrastructure, into soldiers, and all the rest of it. Unfortunately for us, it didn't happen fast enough. Okay? But all through 1948, Israel is going to constantly get stronger and stronger and stronger. And into 49. That's the way it goes. By contrast, the Arabs, who have 40 million, never had, fortunately, and never developed the kind of bureaucratic infrastructure to turn the 40 million into a big army. And so it doesn't matter what your population is. The question is, what can you do with it? If you have vast resources, and I have small resources, but I'm able to use my small resources, and you don't know how to use your vast one, I'm going to win. This has been Israel's Yeshua till today. Theoretically speaking, there's 1.5 zillion Muslims out there, and 1 billion and a zillion Arabs. I mean, it's just a fact. Thank God they haven't been able to organize themselves properly to turn all that into an army, which they could do if they wished, of 10, 20 million men. And then what do you do? If you have 20 million people coming, what do you do? If you have, God forbid, you have 20,000 airplanes, well, what do you do? You see? So this pattern starts in 48. That's what I'm trying to show you over here. So even though it's 40 million Arabs versus 650,000 Jews, which you always see in propaganda, those numbers don't actually mean anything. It's what you can do with it. The two sides actually will fight the war with equal numbers. People are surprised to hear that, but it's because of what I just described. And as 1948 proceeds, Israel will outnumber them. Hear that? By the time you get to January of 49, Israel will have 110,000 men and women under arms. That's a big army. The Arabs will have 20,000, 30,000, there. The Jordanian army never will get more than 8,000 or 9,000. The Iraqi army will never be more than, 10, 15,000, something like that. And similar numbers, the Egyptians will be a little bit more. So it's not what you think of David and Goliath in the sense that we had 3 men and they had 1 million and we beat them. It's kind of funny, but it's a fact that Israel, as time goes on, will actually have more men than the Arabs. Okay? And we'll certainly have more tanks and things like that. This is the edge that Israel has fought to preserve ad hayom hazeh. Thanks to America, Baruch Hashem, Israel still gets the better airplanes and the better ammunition, as you all know, and has the qualitative superiority, which discourages a war. One of the reasons America continues till this day to give them the weapons, aside from the politics of it, is if Israel is perceived as being stronger, then the idea is they're not going to go to war. The old line, you want to keep peace, you have to be armed for war. So it is what it is. Now, again, I say, these guys will not be able to do it. I mean, here's, this is not Beit Shemesh over here. This is, but this is 1948. Well, no, I put these two together simply because it shows you everybody was drafted. You understand? There's the Palmach, as you can see, the iconic photograph from Life magazine of the Palmach couple. You can't get more spitz of who they were. But these guys are also Jews. That's my point. And they'll be drafted into the army too. And even though they look funny and all the rest of it, you fight. You understand? In Mikra Kol, they say, everybody summoned to the colors. Do they have their draft dodges? Of course they do. But never. This country had it too in World War II. But overall, you go by the majority, they're able to put a real draft together. And look, I'm going to tell you something. Reb Chaim Kanievsky was served in the Israeli army in 48. I don't say he wanted to fight it, but they just took everybody. That's right. See, they're all shocked. He says there was no business like now in Bnei Brak anywhere else. It was listen, the Egyptian army was 5 miles away. He said the Jordanian was 20 miles away. And they didn't ask no questions. Everybody comes. I don't say he was a great soldier, but it's not. I don't know if it's so wonderful to be on guard duty or whatever. But because probably holding the ketos. But nevertheless, it shows you this was Israel in 40 because they felt it's backs to the wall. Ein breira. What's the choice? And there you have it. Now, on the other hand, again. I love this Kenneth Bilby. I wrote this down from the book, not Jewish. Describes going around in the battlefronts. And he says one of the startling sights of the war was the Orthodox Jewish youth in their ungainly knee-length pants and black skull caps with side curls, or kiss curls as we call them, moving into the front lines, a rifle in one hand, a fistful of ammunition clips in the other. The Arabs never thought this would happen. But they were wrong. On the other hand, having said that, the Jews too, although they will be good on the mobilization and development of the army and building it up, suffer from a lack of clarity in their goals. They violate the first rule of Clausewitz, right? Who, I'm sure you know that, but Clausewitz said war's a politics by any means. But what he really meant to say is, the famous German military theorist of the 19th century, a very brilliant guy, what he meant to say is what I just told you about a business. Define your goals. What is it you want to do? And Israel, in 1948, was very conflicted, the leadership. And they were not sure which way they wanted to go, and the result has been tragic, a bechia ledorot, as they could call it, something that you can cry about till today. Let me explain what I mean. Looking back from the perspective even of today, and certainly at that time, either you do it or you don't. If you're going to have a state, You better kick all the Arabs. You better be prepared to swallow the consequences. You better take over the whole country and kick out all the Arabs, or just about, and hold your lines. Or don't do it at all. But to do it halfway, which is what ends, which is you just get everybody angry. You have indefensible borders, because they're not defensible. You know that. You have a toxic political atmosphere that doesn't go away and never will. It's the worst of both situations. The current borders of Israel, I'm talking about the 67 borders, you understand what I'm saying, reflect what I just told you. The fundamental lack of clarity in Ben Gurion and all the other guys who talked real tough and who fought very hard and courageously, no question about that, over the Clausewitz thing, which is, but what's the goal? It's very interesting. Benny Morris, for example, many of you will know, a very controversial historian because he wrote the book years ago in which he says the Jews caused the Arab refugee problem, part of which is true, and was used by Arafat and all the others, and now, but recently he wrote again, he said, now that I look at it, back and forth, they should have either kicked everybody out or not done anything in the first place. Because we have, for example, 1 million Arabs in Israel today, as you all know, and I don't blame if I was them also. I would want to get rid of Israel at the first opportunity. Why didn't they see this before? But they didn't. The Israeli leadership have no policy, no goal. They don't know where they want to go on this. I know what they want to go on this. They're, what shall I say, fooling themselves. They figure, we'll get the partition area, we'll get a little bit more and fix it up. And the Arabs, although they scream and say this and that and the other, but they'll change their mind. They'll come to accept what Ben Gurion says, Livrel Uvdot. We'll create realities, and they'll just have to accommodate to it. This was just, self-fooling. Self-delusion. The Arabs are proud people. They have a long culture, and they ain't going anywhere if they can help it. And it's just very interesting the way these things turn out. But the Jews, the Jewish leadership, mind you, I'm talking about the mainline Jewish leadership of Ben Gurion, they were simply psychologically committed to the concept of partition. They said, it's amazing that we even got that. The world will be angry at us if we violate partition. The fundamental legitimacy of Israel, as they saw it at that time, was the UN vote. Right or wrong, even though Ben Gurion said we have it virtual our own historic right over here, but they're very sensitive and scared about the UN vote. It could be that what I'm saying is wrong, and if they would push too hard, the world would intervene. I don't think so, but I understand that way of thinking, and therefore their idea was not, I repeat, not to take over the West Bank or all this kind of stuff. That's not what Ben Gurion wished to do. Now, other generals like Yigal alone said, let's do it. This is a fight among the Israeli leadership. But the people who were the final decision makers, Ben Gurion, Moshe Sharet, Eliezer Kaplan, and people like that, they really are what I just said before. Just hold on to what we have, maybe take a little bit more to smooth out the border areas, make them a little less difficult, and that's it. They fundamentally are very afraid of the United Nations. Now, could they have fended off the United Nations? This is like a what if. And it's one of these games, what if. In my opinion, if you study it closely, they definitely could, but it would require Ostpolitik, as the Germans call it. They would have to be friends with Russia. Okay, they could have done it in 1948, no question about it. If you have to study, I'm not speaking in glittering generalities over here. If you have to study all the diplomatic papers and everything like this, you see, and I hope to talk about this sometime in the future, maybe next year or whatever, but the Soviet Union at that particular moment was willing to back Israel heavily, especially against Abdullah, who they regarded totally as a British tool, which in a certain way was true. And the Iraqis also was a cousin of Abdullah, also the Hashemite dynasty. Israel would have to kiss up to the Soviets, but Ben Gurion and company would not go that route. I think this was a historic mistake on their part. It's easy for me to say over here today, but nevertheless, but I will say it. I can also tell you that what I said was the Shita of Abba Hill Silver. Right? He said, you're doing the wrong thing. Fight the thing, kick them out, hook up with the Russians. I don't mean become a communist country. I didn't say that. That wasn't really required by the Soviets. As long as they're not pro-American, that was good enough. It's what we call, some of us are old enough to remember what they call the Finlandization idea. Do you remember that? They used to talk back in the Cold War period where Finland was next door to Russia. It was completely independent, all the rest of it. But they couldn't ever do anything slightly that would be against the Soviet foreign policy. So what? So what? I'm just telling you, coulda, woulda, shoulda, what might have been. But that's not the way they went. As all this swirls in the air, there's a lot going on, isn't there? his week. This is why it takes me so long. May 15th approaches. May 15th was Shabbos. Officially speaking, the British mandate ends 12 o'clock Friday night. All right? I mean, understand that. 12 o'clock Friday night. A consensus finally, at the last minute, is reached among the Jews for statehood. Among the Jews, everybody's going to get on board, even the Aguda. Here's one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, the head of the Aguda, Rabbi Shimon Levin. Some people remember, I was the brother-in-law of the Ger Rebbe. You can say he's on the list. You know, the Aguda, everybody. Even though my point is like this: they're not a Zionist party, but they take responsibility for the founding of the State of Israel, which is just interesting. And if you go to the Independence Hall Museum, some of us have been there. You'll see they still have the nameplates there. Right, here's Ben Gurion. Here's this one right in front, sitting in front, is all the Aguda people. And that's not a bad thing. It means that they, at the last minute, when all else fails, you go for Achdus. May 15th, as I said before, was the Shabbos. So, very famously, they said we can't start a Shabbos, that's all we need. So, Friday. I mean, what are the British going to do? The day before? And Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon means you're going to have the ceremony and get out so everybody can get home for Shabbos. It's still a very traditional country. There still were many people, even among the general Zionist movement, all the rest of it, the Friday night is Hadlakat Neirot, you know? And you go to Shul and things like this. I'm not saying everybody was totally 100% Shomer Shabbos, but everybody is nevertheless still very much part of the Jewish deal, and it would be offensive to them culturally. He said, I said, not only religious, culturally, to do this in Shabbos. So they have a quick ceremony, okay? Because you got to finish the ceremony in time, which, if I remember correctly, they finish like 3 o'clock or whatever, 3:30, in order to go home and get it for Shabbos. May is not such a short day, but it's not July either. Let's take a look at this. There's the Rothschild Museum, you know. Friday afternoon. All the politicians. It's a different tone. There's Ben Gurion. Well, it feels like $1 million. Here's Rabbi Maimon. You see all the different party leaders. Now everybody should sign the declaration. Chasimas Yadenu. Because it's going to be Shabbos soon. He said, everybody get up and sign. Now, this is what they usually leave out. Now, YouTube is wonderful. They always leave out the second part right afterwards, which is, well, hold on for a second, which is that then as soon as they finished announcing the state, he makes a Shechion, Rabbi Maimon. See, they put a yarmulke on? I don't know if you noticed, some people even go like this, right? And some not. Get it? No, some people were dedicated secularists. Some people are half traditional. It's a snapshot of a moment of Jewish certain type of relationship to traditionalism, which I don't believe exists today, unfortunately. It's very interesting, but there's the sublime and there's always the ridiculous. My favorite story of this is Rabbi Gurion, who, of course, many of you know later we're going to be the head of the army rabbi and the chief rabbi of Israel, always used to tell the story. On May 14th, it was Friday. So as soon as it was over, we went to shul. Tel Aviv, in those days especially, I don't know if you noticed, had 1,000 shuls, shtibels and things like this, much less than today. Today is much less. They had lots of little shuls. He went to some shul and he davened for the Hamid of Friday, Kabbalah Shabbos. He said a Shechiyonu. And the Gabbai went over to him. He says, "Why are you making a Shechiyonu?" He said, "Yes, I just bought a new tie." So, "Oh, that's okay." As I say, with a time element, before Ben Gurion said like this: "Now as a state, we're passing one law and then we're adjourning." Okay. What was the one law? The end of the white paper. Notice, the end of restriction on Jewish immigration. As of this moment, anybody who wants to come to Israel, Jewish, is in. And the minute you land, you're a citizen. So in other words, at least before Shabbos, this is a remarkable point I just said, because it's the end of Jewish homelessness, let's put it that way. People forget, because it's been a long time, thank God, that for centuries, and particularly the 20th century, the homeless Jew was an international phenomenon. We all know, I know you all know, the 1930s and the 40s and the boats, they couldn't get into America and elsewhere, and the people got trapped in Europe in the Holocaust, and other times and places, and it's the homeless Jew. Poland doesn't want him, this one doesn't want him. You could say whatever you want about Israel, you can like or dislike it, but that moment, it's over. It's a big deal. And then he said, "No, we're all leaving." Even Ben Gurion goes to shul that Friday night, but wears a top hat and a whole thing. There's pictures of it. But that was it, just one time for the cameras, and then it's all over. Now, I may have time at the end of this series. I budgeted a talk or two, talk about religion and the state, which is a whole topic of its own, a very complex, very interesting one. But you see a lot of the different fissures and the sides of the Jewish polity, just in 2 minutes on YouTube. Don't you agree? Anyway, we all know, as I mentioned before, Truman, that within 12 hours, within a few hours, U.S. and then Russia both recognize Israel. U.S. as a de facto, Russia totally as a new state. One of the most famous and what they call, the diplomats still talk about this, one of the most embarrassing moments in American diplomacy history is Philip Jessup, the American representative, one of the American representatives of the United Nations, a very famous diplomat. Phil Jessup is making a whole speech where he says the United States is opposed to partition, we want to make a trusteeship, and they shouldn't have a state, and then the Secretary General passes him a little message that says, "Truman, just the United States around the state of Israel." There's a picture of it, I just didn't pull it down from the YouTube, where Phil Jessup is standing there like shocked, like a deer in the headlights, and he says, "I'm awaiting further instructions." But the United Nations, though, on May 15th, immediately announces an embargo. Truman announced an embargo in December. Britain announced an embargo in January. Notice, it was illegal, I repeat, illegal, for anyone in this country from December on to send weapons to Palestine, for the Jews or the Arabs. There were Americans that did it anyway. They thought they were being sneaky. The FBI knew about it. We know now the FBI knew about everything. And sometimes they chose to intervene. Sometimes they didn't choose to intervene. Happens to be in Baltimore, Maryland. I don't know if you know this or not, but here they did ship out some weapons because Tommy D'Alessandro was the mayor. And he was actually pro-Irgun, let alone pro the other thing. That's Nancy Pelosi's father. Right? So it's very interesting. They were running guns. I know myself, a few people, my cousin, whatever, that they used to go down to the harbor and all this kind of stuff. No, let's put it this way. It's not really a chance. Let's be realistic. Yeah, it can be against the law, but that means you deal with a Baltimore jury and a Baltimore judge, and, I don't think Judge Feinblatt's going to give you 100 years or something like that. Or better yet, if you have an Irish judge, as was the case in New York, And they said, you violated British law. Basically, he said, I'll give you a kiss, So, this really, I mean, this happened. The mayor of New York, who was the mayor of New York at the time I'm talking about? O'Dwyer. I rest my case. But this is the way it goes. So the United Nations immediately announces an embargo, and the United Nations immediately makes a move to appoint a mediator to freeze the fighting, which will not be good for Israel. From day one, from the first minute, the United Nations will be basically an anti-Israel factor, and that's the price of doing business, as we say. If you want to have a state, you just have to accept this. They appoint. It takes them a few days. Time matters over here. We're doing this, I won't say microscopically, but we're doing this pretty closely. Time matters. And the state is Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It's till May 20th, so it's like Thursday or so that they appoint Count Bernadotte from Sweden to be the official mediator, with the idea of freezing everything in Palestine, making a ceasefire between all the Jews and the Arabs, and making both sides go back to where they started from, or something like that. Actually, what it means to make Israel go back to where they started from, and there's the pressure. Bernadotte is a member of the Swedish royal family. I don't know if you know that's the Bernadotte family. Sweden, I don't know if you know this or not, their kings became what's the right word? They ran out of children back in the early 1800s. And they were afraid of being attacked by other countries. So they did the interesting thing. They went to one of Napoleon's generals. And they said, "You be the king of Sweden, Marshal Bernadotte." And he said, "I'll take the job." And that's the royal family till today. So they're French. And he's pro-British, fundamentally. He's definitely anti-communism. I mean, after all, he's a Swedish aristocrat. And so he would like as much as possible to accommodate the British, whom he views as being civilized, of course, and all the rest of it. He will fly to Israel as soon as he can later in May. There's logistics in there. And he will demand the return of all the Arabs that were expelled so far. You see? In other words, let's go make a peace treaty. And not a peace treaty, but a ceasefire. But the first things that anybody that left should come back. Let's go to the next one. You can see here, I'll speak as we're showing over here. Bernadotte will be going back and forth from Cairo to Tel Aviv to Amman to Damascus, back to Cairo and to Tel Aviv and all the rest of it. It's Count Bernadotte. He's going to different places. And he will be always pressing Israel and basically saying, listen, there's a right of return. There's an Arab refugee problem. It starts with him. And listen, this plagues Israel down to the present day. You and I know one of the deal breakers is precisely the right of return. Israel's basically... I'm not happy with this, but Israel's basically ready to give everything back. We all know this. Just they're wavering on the right of return. And there are Israeli parties that are I don't know why, but they're in favor of the right of return even. So to one degree or another, it's the most lethal Arab tactic against Israel, goes without saying. And I'll tell you the big tragedy that goes on right now. I'm going a little bit out of order. And I'll try to explain myself better next time. You'll have to take my word for it, though. In May 15th and May 16th, in those weeks, I'd say a window of 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, something like that, they had the opportunity to take the whole thing, I think. They failed. Once they failed, by the time you get to the beginning of June, which is 2 weeks after Israel was founded a state, it's too late. You understand? There are moments in history, as Shakespeare says, tides in the affairs of men, where you either seize the moment or you don't. If Israel by June 1 or thereabouts didn't seize the moment, it was very difficult for it to happen afterwards. It's sad, but that's the way it is. And the fundamental reason it doesn't happen is there are logistic military problems. I'm not poo-pooing that at all. But psychologically, that's not what their plan was. Ben Gurion wasn't thinking in those terms. And he just couldn't turn around so fast and come up with it. They could have gone, they were already just, in May 14th, they captured Tzfat. They could have swept right down Jenin, which was 3/4 abandoned. Then from Jenin, you do Nablus. Once you do that, you have the two parts of the triangle. Then Tulkarm falls. Then you go down to Ramallah. Then you take Jerusalem. If the legion comes in, you outflank them easily and take the bridge and cut them off from their supplies. And it's a total Israeli victory. Right? Now, as I said before, historians get to beat up on dead people. And that's what you do. And then, you play what of course. But it's a fact. So anyway, once Bernadette is there, so it's a tough situation. Israel will therefore have a political pressure breathing down their backs, along with all the other pressure. They could have countered him with Russia, but that's not what they chose to do. One last point: the arms embargo applied to both sides, and so the Arabs will not be able to get weapons that they need in 48. They'll often run out of ammunition. People don't know this. Their planes will lack spare parts and so forth. Same thing applies to the Jews, but in the long run, the embargo hurts the Arabs a lot more because the Jews are more sneaky. They have a whole Aliyah Bet, Haganah network of smuggling. The Zionist movement, by force, had to learn to break laws and smuggle Jews and weapons and things like this back from the 1920s or whatever. So they had whole networks ready to do this in Europe. And they will. I repeat, it's cheating. The Arabs don't have that kind of infrastructure and network set up. They could do it, but it wasn't there in May and June and July and whatever of 1948. And so, although this wasn't the intention of the British, I can guarantee you, they definitely have hurt the Arabs with this embargo, and the Arab historians pounded this. They say it's a whole Zionist plot, everything to do with that day, but it wasn't. It was just the regular stupidity that happens in war. But it didn't stop them from using the planes that they had. Egypt bombs. Listen, right after the Friday night, when it's Shabbos, the Egyptian Air Force bombed Tel Aviv. They killed civilians. Some people here may recognize, let's do the next one, the famous historian Jacob Katz, died not long ago. I know Bernie took some courses with him. Very famous historian in the Hebrew University. He was a religious guy, Professor Yaakov Katz. He had a daughter. It was in his autobiography. He had a daughter and a son, and the daughter was killed in a bomb on Friday night because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. What I mean to say is like this. The Egyptians didn't have any problem with bombing civilians and all the rest of it. You see? A few days later, they hit the Tachana Merkazit in Tel Aviv, and they killed 50 people. And who's the one that's the brutal, in war? Everybody is. At midnight, of Friday night, the Arab Legion crossed the Jordan. It was all legal. They didn't go as long as the British were there, but it becomes legal on Friday. King Abdullah is standing there with a gun, like at Pimlico, He shoots the gun, then they cross the Jordan River, and they go right in there. And their immediate mission is to occupy, as we saw before, the Arab parts of Palestine. I think that's the next map. No, it's not. Let's go back. So he says, let's go back one. He says the immediate mission is to take over the Arab parts of Palestine. Now, again, I told you, everybody doesn't know about the other ones doing it, and they're all misjudging. And so the Jews are convinced that Abdullah wants to take over whole Israel, including Tel Aviv, at least Jerusalem. In fact, Abdullah, in reality, was afraid of provoking the United Nations, which had internationalized Jerusalem. And so he wants to take over, the triangle, the Arab area, the West Bank, as we call it over there, Hebron, all that kind of stuff, which are totally Arab areas over there. In Jerusalem, the Jews think, Abdullah's coming to take over everything. Let's grab what we can of this old city while we can before he comes to attack. And so the Jewish forces start taking over Arab neighborhoods because they think Abdullah's coming over there, which wasn't the case. Here's the unintended consequences. The local Arabs in Jerusalem freak out naturally. He said, the Jews are taking over everything. And they run to Abdullah and they say, you better help us. Do something about it. Abdullah then says, well, we got to rescue the Arabs. They'll do another deed. And so they send the Arab Legion into the old city. The commander-in-chief, General Glubb, no way, fought very hard for the Arab Legion to get involved in Jerusalem. He said, correctly so, an army like the Arab Legion is not configured for urban warfare, which takes a lot of casualties. If your whole army is 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 men, you can't afford a lot of casualties. If you have so and so many bullets and so many bombs, and you don't have that many, you've got to husband them and you have to cover the whole West Bank to protect against the Jews. We could lose the whole army and the whole city, but it doesn't matter. That's what happens, and therefore bitter fights break out over specific neighbors. Katama and Sheikh Jarrah and this and that and the other. All through the Jewish parts and the Arab parts. This is when, Neve Yaakov, all these places have big bombs and fights over there. The Jewish quarter, the Rova Yehudi that we all know. Yeah, you all know what I'm talking about. Haganah screw-ups, big time. Make a lot of mistakes. The general there was not good. General Shaltiel, he screwed up a lot. You're in, tell me if you know what I'm talking about. You're in Rechavia. Then you go down that, Michigan and Shananim, and you go up to the Zion Gate or the Jaffa Gate. Okay? So if you want to get to the Rova, what do you got to do? You got to go capture those gates and get in. They have their chances. They blew it. There were times where the whole gate was open for hours. Like I say, I can't do this microscopically. I don't have time. But what I can tell you is that they can't break into the Rehov Yafo because it's easily defendable. But you know where the Shar Tzion is? You all know what I'm talking about? Right? Over on the side. Really, the quicker way to go to the Kotel, isn't it? You go down and you go up. I know you all know what I'm talking about. That they are able to break into, so they're able to reinforce the Jewish quarter. But these are not coordinated attacks. There are no real plans. Many of the Haredim in the Rova want to surrender to save their lives, and they figure the Arabs will, cut a deal with them and all the rest of it. But the Legion is there in their professional army, and they undertake to go after the Rova Yehudi, which I don't blame them, right? And they methodically blast their way with cannon into the Rova, and ultimately it results in them capturing and blowing up the Churva synagogue. Now here's one of those arguments. The Arabs say we blew up the Churva synagogue because the Haganah was using for, the Jews say we never used it for that. Who will ever know? But they blew it up. The Churva, some of us have been there recently, was recently rebuilt. And it's like it was once upon a time. So you can imagine what an important structure it was. When they dynamited the whole place, it took the heart out of the Jews. Very big psychological factor. It just did. This all happens in the 2 weeks following May 14th. Right? In other words, on the 15th, they come in the West Bank. 16th, 17th, 18th, the Legion isn't in the city yet. If the Haganah would only have their men there, if they only have their Jigal alone, it's not like they got to take the whole city, but they didn't. It's would have, could have, should have. By then, they come in, and by May 28th, what's that, another 10 days or so, the Rova falls. As you'll see in a second, the people in the community, they're from Jews. They were old people and things like this. They weren't fighters. They didn't want to get killed. There was no food left or anything like that. And so 2 weeks after May 14th, it falls. Life magazine was there. I was serious. And they had pictures. These are two Rabbanim, one Ashkenaz and one Sephardi, the chief rabbis of the Edot. And there they were with the Arab Legion. Let me say this. The Arab Legion was commanded by Abdullah Tell, as you'll see in a second. They're very civilized. You can't deny that. When the Jews will surrender, the Arabs will want to kill them, and they'll shoot Arabs to keep them away from the prisoners. So you can't say that they acted in a brutal fashion. They knew they were being watched. And it's also true that the British officers didn't want to look like they're, what shall I say, an undisciplined army. And so they did do it, but it was a disaster, obviously, for the Jews. The Life magazine was there, and they took amazing photos. I just got this all off a line. As you can kind of see, you can see better than I can. Here is, it looks like a Meir Sharm a little bit in the back, right? But, that's how the chutzers used to look once upon a time. Now, hold on for a second. Don't switch this yet. They told them you have 2 hours or whatever to get your stuff, and then you're going to leave. As soon as they do leave, and they weren't killed, the mobs will come in and burn everything and destroy it. Look at it a few hours later. Next picture. You see what I'm saying? Okay? And that's what that's what it is. The Life magazine. Look at the next picture. Here you see they're going out of the Zion Gate. Isn't it amazing? And you can see. These are all religious people. And let's go to the next picture. And there you see one couple of many. That's the good photographer in life. You personify it. See, it's actually the parents of the person who was later the chief rabbi of Haifa of Kaniel. And that's it. You have to leave. That's what it is. This was a big blow, obviously, for the Jews, but not in the strategic sense, right? In other words, they lost the Rova. I'm not minimizing that, of course, but the Arabs have no chance, not really, of taking the new city. They had a big fight just to take over the Jewish quarter, which was hardly defended and inadequately defended, and the civilian population wasn't in it. In general, it's very depressing to read about the Battle of Jerusalem in May of 48. You're going to laugh at what I'm saying, but I don't mean to be funny. It's very good to read in the 9 days, in the 3 weeks, because it's more Jewish screw-ups than their brilliance. It is what it is. To make matters worse, right around on the road between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem to get the supplies into the new city, Latrun is the big fortress that the British had built. Many of you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure some of us have been there. They have, I think, a tank museum there of a certain type. And it's strategic in the areas. For 4 days, nobody's there. is empty. The Haganah just failed to realize it and didn't take it. All the junk that they suffered later on, when they lost hundreds of men, didn't need to happen. But as I say before, it's the fog of war. No one in Israel or anywhere else claims that Israel did not make many, many big mistakes in war. Everybody does. They got some things right too. But you can't, deny what happened. And so once again, within a few days, the Legion takes, Latrun and Bab al-Wad, the whole year to get through. And we're back to January, February, March of 48, in which you can't get through and they shoot at you on all the sides. And this time it's not a bunch of Arab gangs, but it's the Jordanian Legion, and it didn't need to happen. Jerusalem goes under siege. This guy, let's go to the next picture, Dov Yosef, who was a big officer in the Mapai. He becomes the governor of the city of Jerusalem, and he's a tough guy, which you need to be. And he's like this: we're going to hold out, and anybody talks about surrender, I will shoot. It is what it is. I just remember they said like this: what do you need for supplies? We need this and this much food, and so many cigarettes. And Ben Gurion, who didn't smoke, he said, what do you need cigarettes for? He says, I'm telling you, the soldiers need cigarettes. And they will hold out, but it won't be easy, as you can imagine. General Glubb, the British, commander of the Arab Legion, he doesn't want to really take the new city because he knows that he'll lose so many men doing so. It's easier said than done to do Rechavia and this neighborhood and that neighborhood. There's a lot of Jews there, and they're going to fight. It's going to be like Stalingrad. His second in command, as I said before, this guy, Colonel Tell, he definitely wants to, and he wants to keep the Israeli forces from overrunning the old city. And the only way to do it is to totally wipe them out in the new city. Otherwise, the Israelis will get reinforced in the new city, take over the old city, and then go right away to Jericho and then to the Allenby Bridge and cut off the whole Arab Legion and get wiped out. Now, the Israelis had no intention of doing that. I don't know if they had the capability, but I told you before, it's two drunks banging against each other. Everybody responds to what they think the other person is going to do. The Haganah was absolutely sure that Glubb wants to capture the new city. Ben Gurion goes viral. He said, we're going to lose Jerusalem, even if we have to sacrifice many, many men over there. Going viral is not a good substitute for military judgment. When you are in that kind of an excited frame of mind, you make mistakes. And Ben Gurion makes terrible mistakes over here. In late May and early June, there'll be, I won't go into details, that he will order the Israeli army, as it's called now, to attack Latrun, and they must take that place at all costs. He starts talking the talk of World War I, and therefore he pays the price of World War I. In World War I, they said, take that place no matter what. Charge the men into the machine guns, seize that place. We all know it didn't work. That's not the way to do it. And the generals, Yigal Yadin and Allah, they say, this is not the way to do it. Don't do it. And not only that, but what can I tell you? The attacks are not coordinated properly because he's breathing on our backs. Like, do it now, and I'll appoint the general and I'll fire. He doesn't know the professional stuff. The Israeli generals barely knew the professional stuff. And it's also, this is Ben Gurion at his worst. Okay? And so after the repulse for the second or third time with massive losses and terrible things over there, and it's hot. Many people die it's the middle of May, it's a Chamsin, so many people die there from the thirst, waiting for someone to pick them up when they're wounded. It's just a terrible, terrible business. And Mickey Marcus, who I know everybody knows I'm talking about, was the American person sent over there. He says, the artillery and all that was good, but the infantry was very poor. But why is the infantry very poor? Look at the next picture. You have people that, take it from off the boat, from the DP camps. You give them in there, and you give them a rifle, and maybe the rifle works if it doesn't, and the officer's talking in Ivrit and other language, it's not the way to do it. So if you tell me the language, but something has to be done, that's stupid. Right? You can't just say something has to be done. War is a business, like everything else, and has to be done either in the right way, or you don't do it, or you pay you pay the price. In the end, the whole thing was absolutely unnecessary, because all of us know, I know this crowd, everybody knows what they ended up doing anyway, building a Burma road. Right? So he didn't need to waste anybody on the Latrun. I'm not saying they were happy with it, but that's what they ended up doing anyway. If you're talking from the military point of view, what is your clarity? What is your objective? If the objective is to reinforce Jerusalem and provide them with the necessary supplies and reinforcements, figure a way to do that, and don't tell me you get fixated on a fortress, which they never captured in the end. So in the end, what's the result of everything I'm talking about? Abdullah ended up getting the West Bank. Israel kept West Jerusalem. It lost the Rova, but the point is that after a couple of weeks of fighting between the Jews on the one hand, Jordanians on the other, as even Stephen, there are no significant territorial losses for each side. It's important to realize Abdullah, despite all his rhetoric, never did attack Israel. He could if he would. He would if he could. But he never did. He was too smart and cautious to do so, and I'll discuss this in the future. I said it, unfortunately. I wish he was incautious. I wish he had attacked Israel. That would give Israel an excuse to go and take over the West Bank or parts of it. But he understood what I just told you. He was the only smart Arab in 48. And no, I'm serious. And he realized the worst thing we can do to Jews is accept the peace terms. You hear what I said? The worst thing we can do to the Jews, if the Arabs would be smart, in 1947, they would say, we accept the peace terms 100%. Have a state with 650,000 Jews, 400,000 Arabs, and choke on it. We're not going to do nothing to you. Let's see what happens. But they couldn't see it that way, but he did. Most importantly, within June 1st, June 6th, the Legion itself, the Arab Legion in Jordan, is totally exhausted. A relatively heavy loss of men. They have like 500 killed, which for a small army is a lot, and how many wounded. And material losses can't be made up because there's the embargo that I told you about. Israel, on the other hand, is the opposite. Ben Gurion knows this. As May and June and July goes on, more secret illegal boats are coming in with weapons. They're flying from Czechoslovakia and middle of the night airplanes. They're bringing the guy, Yehuda Razi. This is sad. This is chutzpah. He bought, I think in South Carolina, an old aircraft carrier. And then he thought big. An aircraft carrier, filled it full of weapons and things like this. At the last minute, I think the FBI stopped him or whatever. Otherwise, it would have been really interesting over there. What can I tell you? So Israel's getting stronger and stronger, and the Arabs are not. Abdullah and Bevin, the British leader, terrified that Israel might do what it should have done, which is to concentrate their forces and nuke the Legion, making the seizure of the West Bank easy and destroying the very essence of Abdullah. I mean, Israel had enough men, again, this is hindsight, Israel had enough men, clearly, especially as time went on, to break through anywhere. The Legion is very small, holding a wide front. Break through anywhere, go to their rear, catch the bridge, cut them off on supplies, and wipe it out. That's not what Ben Gurion was able to do. Ben Gurion was wedded, as I say before, to the partition plan, so we have a Bechia Ledorot. On the other hand, the armies of Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon do indeed invade. They go for Tel Aviv, and they do intend to drive the Jews into the sea, but I'm out of time. All joking aside, as you see over here, I haven't wasted anything tonight, but I originally intended to do, here's Rabbi Oberstein smiling at me, I originally intended to do the whole first period of May, June, July, August. But you see that we've started to scratch the surface. And there's a lot I left out in there, but I won't. It's silly for me not to do this right. I hope you agree with that. And so we may end up having to make this a 13-part series instead of